And welcome. It is in fact three women, and I am your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. And today we are talking refugees. We're talking about Syrian refugees, and boy, do I have a panel. First of all, we've got Jennifer Wells here, journalist, 35 years, the Toronto Star, business columnist, and with Roncesvalles Refugee Relief. We also have Naoim Alboim, founder of Lifeline Syria. She's an adjunct prof, chair of Policy Forum at the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University, and Rain Zuckerman, Project Xenia for Syria, a lawyer, a filmmaker, and its founder. Welcome to Three Women.
Thank you.
So let's start right in. And by the way, before I do, you are welcome to call in. Of course, as always, we are live, 416-946-7000. Or if you're the shy sort, you can tweet me at CHERIDINOVO if you want to send in your comments or questions, and I'll throw out to these wonderful women who are experts. Let's start with one of them. Jennifer, why did you get involved in this? What spoke to you about this issue?
Well, I mean, it was just a happenstance encounter, actually, in the neighborhood, and I think that's how a lot of these groups coalesce and grow organically. Walking down the street during a fall festival, you run into a neighbor. You haven't seen her in 15 years, and she says, you know, a couple of us have been getting together and thinking about this, and let's sit down and talk about it. So the beginnings were very simple, and I think I'm not dissimilar from many. When you have it in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this is something that I would like to get involved in. I actually don't know how to go about doing that. I would like to commit, and I'm happy to commit both time and resources. And so it was really very simple and very straightforward. And that was in about, I would say, end of September.
And this issue in particular?
Absolutely, this issue in particular. It just strikes right to the heart, and doesn't let go. And I think that's what's really kept us motivated is the ongoing sense of this never-ending ribbon of migration, and it just can't be ignored. And so it wasn't a hard, difficult decision at all.
I spent a couple of weeks south of the border not too long ago, and let me tell you, the mood is decidedly divided down there. We really do we live in a kinder and gentler nation, but however, there's still a bit of a pushback even here. Have you come across that yourself?
I haven't. I've found that the outreach in terms of we could use some financial support, there's broad receptivity to that, absolutely. I haven't found myself engaged in any of those street corner conversations, as you might during a political campaign, for instance, where you start to air your views. That doesn't weigh down on those conversations. They're just, at least in my experience, there seems to be a universal sense of we have to coalesce around this, we have to do something. Encouraging.
Rain, why did you start Project Xenia for Syria?
I didn't start it, but I joined the group. I come from my grandparents. My grandparents were displaced people after the Second World War, and they needed a country to go to. They couldn't go home.
From where?
On both sides, they were from Eastern Europe, and they decided that they didn't want to go back. And as Jews, on one side of my family, had undergone a trauma from the war, and they wanted to start a new life. And so they were waiting for a country to accept them. And, they were lucky enough to be accepted to Canada. And so I feel like I could be those people in Syria. They're really no different than my grandparents. So I decided that, it's been something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And I had some financial support, and I was trying to find a group. And it was the first time in my life where I was like, I'm not religious. I don't go to a synagogue. I don't go to church. And I was like, well, how do I find people that are interested? And I sort of talked about it with some of my friends, and, they weren't uninterested, but it takes a serious commitment to get a group together and to do things correctly. And I realized that I didn't want to have that burden all on me. And so I just continued to talk about it with friends, and a friend of a friend was starting a group out in the East End, and so I joined their email list and heard a little bit about what they were doing, and they felt very far and just a very different group of people. And so, again, I just kept talking about it with friends. I went to a neighborhood party, put a list out, asked people to join the group. I didn't get any takers because obviously if you don't know people, it's hard to get them to trust you, especially when you're trying to raise money. And so then again, a friend of a friend had started a group and they already had some funding, and they were looking for more, and they were looking for more people that were committed and that were going to contribute lots of time, which is, I think, one of the most challenging things about having a group. And so I couldn't have been luckier. I mean, they're all parents of young children like I am, and they are the most organized people I've ever met. And so I feel it's kind of funny because it's a group of people that I've only recently met, but because we have this common goal and everyone's very open and kind, it's been like meeting a whole new group of friends instantaneously.
And Naomi, how did the Syrian refugee crisis speak to you? Why did it speak to you?
Well, like Rain, I'm actually the daughter of a refugee from Poland. My mother came here after the Holocaust, and our home, after the end of the Second World War and after the displaced people started coming, our home was a reception center for many refugees, friends and family members that had survived and ended up in our house. So it was sort of in my DNA to become involved in this. Professionally,
where did your family settle when they first came over from Poland?
Well, my mother's, it's a very long story, but she ended up in Montreal. She actually went to, she was on the last boat before Pearl Harbor to California, and then made her way to New York, and then made her way up to Montreal. But professionally, I became very interested in this issue. And I was working for the federal government for many years, and in 1979, I was asked to coordinate the refugee movement from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia for the federal government for the region of Ontario. And that was the most amazing experience, both personally and professionally, I probably have ever had. And I then became a deputy minister federally and then provincially, and immigration issues were things that I were one of the portfolios that I had responsibility for. And then when I left government, I started teaching, and immigration refugee policy was the focus for my work in Canada. About a couple of years ago, I guess it was, a group of us that had been involved in the Vietnamese movement got together and said, there's something very wrong here. Canada is doing nothing in this area. We should be doing a whole lot more. And we have done it before. We've done it with lots of different refugee movements. Why is nothing happening here? And we organized a conference bringing together all the old folks that had been involved in 79, 80, 81, from visa officers abroad to the minister of the day, Ron Atke, to people who had worked in the community, sponsors, refugees who had come in at the time, and people at all different levels who had been involved. And we talked about what were the lessons learned from that movement and how could they be applied to the Syrian crisis. And we started writing, and we knew that perhaps the administration of the day would not be receptive right away, but maybe if we built some kind of groundswell, we would be ready when the time was right. And we were ready when the time was right. Were
you at the airport?
No, I wasn't at the airport for the first arrivals, but we also, a group of us got together, and I must correct your introduction. I'm not the founder. I am one of the founders of Lifeline Syria, but a group of us got together wanting to replicate an organization that had existed in 79, 80, 81. That time it was called Operation Lifeline, because we really thought that there were people exactly like Jennifer and Rain who wanted to do something but didn't know what and didn't know how. And Lifeline Syria was there to do some of the public awareness, public education, to promote private sponsorship, to encourage people to come forward, to provide them with the training and the support, and to do some of the paperwork to ease the way so that ordinary people in ordinary neighborhoods could do what their heart was telling them to do, but they didn't quite know how. And the response to Lifeline Syria has been absolutely amazing. We have hundreds of sponsorship groups now ready to go.
It must be fascinating to you with such a history in the area. Do you hear from, I mean, they were called at the time, quotes unquote, boat people, but do you hear from some of those that you worked with back in the 70s?
Absolutely. I mean, those relationships and friendships have lasted for years and decades. And what is really heartwarming is to see how many Vietnamese people who came then are now sponsoring Syrians. It's just a wonderful Canadian story that people are paying back and paying forward.
So let's get into a bit of the nitty-gritty, because I'm sure there are people listening in who say, I wouldn't even know how to begin or where to begin or what to do, and we don't have the extra room, but somehow we want to be involved. Maybe we'll get back to you, Jennifer. You were one of those people. You just started off from scratch. What were some of the first things you found out, and what were some of the first hurdles?
Well, I think one of my first questions was, once I started to understand a little bit better what the actual protocol is around this, and there is protocol. I mean, you need to have a police check, to go through some volunteer training so you understand what lies ahead, what level of commitment lies ahead, and all of that. I think one of my
where
first...
do you get those things? Where do you get that police check and that?
Well, for us, it would just be the Toronto Police Services,
okay.
and it's very straightforward. And I think my interest initially when I sat down with the group, we knew we needed to find an organization upon which we could piggyback in order to have charitable status. We knew that would be important for the fundraising initiative. We really started looking through church communities, although we insisted that we wanted to be known not as a faith-based group necessarily. And so we started working with Bloor Street United Church. And that's the organization that we're going to be working with going forward. So I certainly found that through the church communities that was an avenue to finding out a lot of information quite quickly, and they're really extremely well prepared, in my experience, in terms of knowing what's out there and how to support those groups.
It's true the United Church has had quite a history with this. Rain, what about you? When you first got going, what was your first move?
Well, we are using Lifeline Syria as an amazing resource. I mean, they've created a guidebook that outlines the process. And I think where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, you just kind of have to go for it. And, we couldn't get tax receipts. We didn't team up with a charitable organization, although we tried. But we just decided to keep plowing forward. And so we've been going to different meetings. So Lifeline Syria offers different information sessions. We've joined a Facebook group where it's the GTA and Greater Area Sponsorship Umbrella Group. And there are all kinds of groups that have gone to that site and share information. There are all kinds of groups that have posted all of their paperwork. And so, get in touch with other groups that have already done it or other people. The Arab Community Council is offering different information centers, sessions to learn more about Syria, and you meet all kinds of people at those information sessions. I would say the most important thing is to talk about it and to express your interest, and you'll find other people that are interested as well.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to Three Women, and you're listening to three amazing women who are involved in trying to provide a solution for those who come from Syria as refugees. And that's what we're talking about. You're free to join the conversation and ask questions if you will, or tweet me questions at CHERIDINOVO. Naomi, have you felt or heard any pushback? I started this question off with Jennifer, just seeing that there is some out there. Have you encountered any of that?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. Because of my work with Lifeline Syria and because of my sort of general policy work and advocacy work that I've been involved with on this topic, I mean, that's very, very satisfying work, but I also wanted to have hands-on involvement. So I have been very actively involved in a little group at my synagogue at it's called Naoim. It's a Reconstructionist congregation to sponsor a family here. And frankly, I wasn't sure about how the Jewish community as a community would respond to the sponsorship of Syrian refugees for all kinds of reasons. And the response from my congregation was overwhelmingly positive. I also met with someone from the Board of Rabbis, which is the board that primarily more of the progressive congregations in the city, to ask them to become more involved with the sponsorship. Jewish Immigrant Aid Services is now an umbrella agreement holder for refugee sponsorships, and they have 35 families that they are bringing into the country. So in terms of pushback, I was actually wondering how, and at Lifeline Syria, we raised this as the board, and how would Syrian refugees feel about being sponsored by Jews and by synagogues? Because I didn't want to go down that route if the response might be negative or if they were apprehensive. And to a person, the Syrians with whom I discussed this said they will be delighted and thrilled. And in fact, there are a number of mosques and synagogues working in partnership to sponsor families. So I just think that this is a whole nation-building exercise. It's bringing people together that perhaps never would have been brought together before, whether it is in neighborhoods or whether it is from very different cultures or very different faiths. The only pushback I personally have ever received is I have done a lot of media, and I unfortunately have gotten some hate mail and have gotten some emails. Not very many, but some individuals, always anonymous, who will say that, I'm destroying the country by encouraging Syrians to come here. But very few and far between. The overwhelming reaction has been really positive.
Or the only pushback that I've heard, and is simply, well, we have all these people in need in the country of Canada. Why aren't we looking after them first? Rain, have you heard anything like that in your work? Any response to that?
No, I might just be living in a bubble, but no, it's been very positive around me. I think that there's been this, especially over the holidays, there was just an incredible, it just seemed to be in the news and the media all the time, and there was incredible goodwill.
Mm-hmm. That's overwhelmingly what I've experienced too, but there has been a bit. Naomi, yes?
One of the things, I guess, again, looking back to 79, 80, 81, one of the incredible aspects of that movement was that there were so many individual citizens that became involved in this initiative then that everybody knew someone who was either directly involved or someone who knew someone who was directly involved. And what developed as a result of that movement, was that the private sponsors who never had to confront issues or programs or services that lower income people or people who are less advantaged would access. The sponsors became aware of real problems in our social safety net, and they became advocates, not just for the refugees that they were sponsoring, but for others, because those services were not available for the refugees and they were not available for others in Canada. I'm really hoping that this movement will have the same kind of impact. People are now really hearing about the lack of affordable housing big time. Mm. Maybe that will actually result in some real policy or program change at the federal, the provincial, and municipal level to actually address the issue of lack of affordable housing in some communities. So I'm hoping the spin-off will actually help everybody.
It's an excellent point. I know that it was a real eye-opener for particularly United Church that I'm aware of that took in some refugees who were to be deported, some Roma refugees, a refugee family who lived with them for over a year as a result. and they really learned the hard way about what it is to look after a family and stand up for them, all the legal and all the other ramifications that came along with that. Jennifer, we started to talk about some of those ramifications. What else should people know about this? What do you need? You need a police check. You need a group of people. You need, in your estimation, but not necessarily, because RAIN doesn't have that charitable association, charitable number. But what sort of things are you required to have going into this as a sponsor?
Now, I don't know if this is an actual requirement, but certainly within our group, we were instructed that we needed to have training. And we went through, now I'm going to stumble on this, it was the Anglican United Refugee Alliance, I believe, ORA, I believe is what it's called, Naomi. And so that was a one evening session, and sometimes happening on weekends. And that was extremely instructive, but it was absolutely asserted within the group that you needed to go through that, because obviously you need to understand clearly what lies ahead. I think the thing we're coming to is that raising money for a group and doing this, I mean, that's really the easy part. And I think what we need to understand more clearly is that the year-long support, like, you have to be prepared to commit for a year. And certainly within our group, it's like a cluster of individuals. Many of us had not met before. And we become this sort of atomized organism, and we're each taking on different aspects of it, being housing or finance, drawing up a budget, working with the internet provider, all these different elements. And you need to be prepared that you're going to be devoted to that cause for at least a year. And what you can't even segregate is the whole idea of emotional support, or whether the family has trauma in its experience prior to coming. And I think what Naomi said about the private sponsorships is so interesting, because I think what's coming out now is that the private sponsorships in the main are doing such a good job of bringing people in and holding them close. And it seems to be, according to some reports, a bit of a difficulty sometimes for the government to be able to do that on the same level. Fair to say?
Mm-hmm. So support for a year, you need that. That's something. And housing, you need to be able to find them that.
And sustainable housing,
and sustainable, right? And also we're looking at folk who have a number of other needs as well. Rain, you wanted to weigh in too?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't go to a formal training session other than through Lifeline Syria. But, you know, there is, like, we followed the guidebook, and there was lots of discussion about what needed to be done.
The guidebook. Where is this guidebook?
The guidebook is on the Lifeline Syria website.
Okay, just so folk know. Yes, continue.
But I think I was a little naive going into it. I mean, our family hasn't arrived yet, so really we're still in the process of preparing for the family. And at first I was just shocked by how incredibly organized some of the members of our group were, but in a really good way. I mean, I feel like in some ways we've started a little company, and we've divided it into the different portfolios. So there's health, there is housing, there is childcare and anything related to the children. There's helping them find employment, and then there's fundraising. So there are Lifeline Syria's, again, I'm sorry to keep repeating it, but it has been a great resource. And they said for a family of 4, we should raise about $27,000 as a minimum. And so, you know, we've raised, if you want to have a contingency, then you can raise more money, and you can have more flexibility or just more security, knowing that you're going to be able to take care of whatever arises. And it's just a lot of talking. I mean, we are in touch with the family that our group has been matched with, and we're just waiting to hear when they're going to arrive.
Oh, tell us about them. What do you know about them?
So what we know about them is that it's a family of 4, so a husband, wife, and 2 children. We were expecting to be matched with some of the stories that we hear in the news of a family in a refugee camp. That's not the case for our family. They moved to Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, and he's very educated as a doctor. And so they are refugees in that they are stateless, but they aren't necessarily in complete crisis and living in horrible conditions like some other refugees. And yeah, I mean, we Skype with them. Technology's great.
Oh, lovely.
One of the members of our group is already talking with the wife and trying to give her some language training, so helping her with her English.
How old are the children?
The children are 4 and 7, which is great because everyone in our group is parents of relatively young children, so we're hoping that our kids are going to become friends.
And Naomi, maybe you can weigh in here. How does the matching happen? You've seen that end of it. Why this family to that group?
Well, there are two ways that sponsor groups can be matched with refugee families. One is through a program that the federal government has implemented called the Blended Visa Office Referral Program, which is where refugees have been identified by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees as being eligible for resettlement to third countries like Canada because there is no durable solution for them. Canada then interviews them and determines whether they are in fact admissible and eligible to come to Canada, and profiles of those selected families by Canada. And these families tend to be larger families with medical issues or issues of disability. They're really the most vulnerable of families. Those profiles are posted on a weekly basis, and sponsorship agreement holder organizations can look at those lists and determine if any of the sponsoring groups that they are assisting would be a good match, and a match is made in that way. The other way to be matched is there are a number of Syrian Canadians already here in Canada who are quite concerned about relatives or friends who are refugees in a wide variety of countries. And they come forward to organizations like ours or to the Arab Community Center and complete forms with our assistance about those refugee families. And then if there's a sponsor group here who is interested in helping the family unification of a Syrian Canadian family here with refugees abroad, we put them together and they are matched. And then the family here, the Canadian contact, works very closely with the sponsor group, and they sort of form a unified sponsor group to assist the family members from abroad. Those are the two ways now for sponsors here to be matched. Lifeline Syria, we see ourselves as matchmakers. That's a lot of what we do. We work with the Canadian Syrians and the sponsors and with government in terms of the visa office referred cases, and put the groups together.
And what kinds of numbers are we looking at? Numbers of folk who would like to be matched versus sponsors? What does that look like?
Well,
we've said we'll take 25,000, I gather, the federal government. So what does that, are there 25,000 already out there that have been screened and vetted, or are we looking at 10,000, or what are the numbers?
Okay, so this is, since the election, the new federal government has made it very, very clear that the 25,000 figure that they are talking about is for government-assisted refugees, and that all privately sponsored refugees would be over and above that figure. So they have been processing many government-assisted refugees. In terms of the timelines, there's a mix of both privately sponsored refugees and government-assisted refugees that will comprise the first group that will come in by March 1st, and then the remainder will come in after that. So we haven't heard yet. We're all eagerly waiting for now that Parliament is sitting, for the immigration levels plan to be tabled by the minister that will indicate specifically, aside from the 25,000 government assisted, will there be a cap for privately sponsored refugees, or will that be an open-ended figure and the government will respond to the interest shown by private sponsors and will process any and all refugees that the private sponsors are providing financial support for and human support for.
Now, as a matchmaker yourself, though, how many families are you working with that you're looking for sponsors for?
We now actually have more Syrian Canadian families that have self-identified than we have sponsor groups that have been through the whole process. We have many sponsor groups in the works that are raising their monies or putting their groups together, but have not yet been absolutely finalized. Once they're finalized, we will, I hope, be able to satisfy a lot of the family reunification cases. The blended visa office referred cases are still a very small number coming forward. We're talking about hundreds. We're not talking about thousands.
Yeah. Well, we're going to speak more about Syrian refugees. We're going to talk about how you can be a sponsor, be involved, what goes into it with these amazing women. When we come back, we're going to take a bit of a break. You're listening to Three Women, of course. And we're going to hear from somebody who's actually Indigenous. We're all immigrants here, aren't we? Buffy St. Marie, and we'll be back in a minute.
He's 5'2" and he's 6'4". He fights with missiles and with spears. He's all 31 and he's only 17. He's been a soldier for 1,000 years. He's a Catholic, a Hindu, an atheist, a Jain, a Buddhist and a Baptist and a Jew. And he knows he shouldn't kill, and he knows he always will kill. You for me, my friend, and me for you. And he's fighting for Canada, he's fighting for France, he's fighting for the USA. And he's fighting for the Russians, and he's fighting for Japan. And he thinks we'll put an end to war this way. And he's fighting for democracy, he's fighting for the Reds. He says it's for the peace of all. He's the one who must decide who's to live and who's to die. And he never sees the writing on the walls. But without him, how would Hitler have condemned him at Dachau? Without him, Caesar would have stood alone. He's the one who gives his body as a weapon to the war. And without him, all this killing can't go on. He's the universal soldier, and he really is to blame. But his orders come from far away no more. They come from him and you and me. And brothers, can't you see? This is not the way we put an end to war.
They are growing pains. It'll sort of...
Are back. It was a short tune. You're listening to Three Women. I'm Sherry DeNovo, your host, MPP Parkdale High Park, and we're talking about Syrian refugees and really our collective response to that. I have phenomenal women in the studio with me live. We've got Jennifer Wells, Naomi Alboim, and Rain Zuckerman, all involved with groups from Lifeline Syria, that's Naomi. Jennifer's involved with Roncesvalles Refugee Relief, and Rain with Project Xenia for Syria. They're all involved in this field, and we've got a caller. But just before we go there, Naomi, you had said something during the break that I thought was really interesting and needs to be picked up on, and that is that privately sponsored refugee families do better than government ones. Tell us about that.
Well, the research has shown that those that come to Canada under the private sponsorship movement actually do better in terms of their longer-term economic status, in terms of their employment status, their income levels, and their integration. I think we have to unpack that a little bit. In terms of the privately sponsored refugees, I mean, we heard the refugees are surrounded by people with expertise, knowledge, commitment, who have their own social networks, who have their own social capital that they are now sharing with the refugee families. And the refugee families clearly benefit from that wraparound support and the social networks and social capital. The government-assisted refugees come here, and they are assisted by not-for-profit organizations who are very expert and really good staff, but they are staff people. Many of the organizations do recruit volunteers to assist, but it's a different kind of commitment than the private sponsors have. But the other thing that I think is really important is for those privately sponsored refugees who come here because they have family members already here, that additional family support is just golden.
Oh, that makes all the difference.
Because the families will do anything for the families that actually arrive. So they have not only the private sponsors, but their family to provide them with that additional support.
We have a caller, and I'm going to go to her. Hello, welcome. You're on air on Three Women. Who am I speaking to? Hello?
I believe you're speaking to Julia Barnett.
Oh, hi, Julia. Hi. Okay, so Julia from Parkdale Health, right?
Parkdale Community Health Center.
Parkdale Community Health Center. Julia, we're talking, of course, about Syrian refugees. Do you want to weigh in here?
That's right, sure. So I really appreciate what's being said so far, and that's one of the reasons why Parkdale Community Health Center is trying to call an emergency meeting in Parkdale to address this very issue. That we're very aware of what many of the refugees face, and how the differences that exist in terms of private sponsored and having access to much more a social network and access to a lot more not only services but wraparound kind of care that was mentioned. And as a result, we are one of the organizations that are going to be triaging about 200 Syrian refugees that are going to be arriving in Parkdale shortly. We don't know exactly when, of course, but we're very aware that they are going to need immediate supports and services and access to not only primary health, which we're completely right now arranging and organizing with other organizations and other healthcare providers. But we're very aware that folks absolutely need the type of wraparound and social networks and supports that private-sponsored refugees will be getting and already are getting from those who are sponsoring them. And so that's why we've called it an emergency meeting, because it's absolutely true that funded organizations that do a wide range of services and programs cannot meet the needs and the supports, but that a whole community can. And you know that whole saying, it takes a village. Well, in this case, it really does. And I think Parkdale has excellent examples of coming together during crises and being able to work together and partner and provide a real community-based response. And that's what I'm hoping in the case of 200 refugees that are government-sponsored coming to Parkdale.
These are government-sponsored, and they're going to be staying where when they get to Toronto?
Well, in our case, they'll be staying at the Howard Johnsons at Roncesvalles and Queensway, and we're expecting a whole multitude of issues and areas in which we need to support and provide, access to all kinds of things for them. So that's why we're having this emergency meeting, so that we not only bring service providers or community-based organizations, non-for-profits, and volunteers, but people in the community who want to do something. And we could do that. The best way we could do that is organize and mobilize together.
So, Julie, when is the meeting?
Our meeting is this Wednesday, Wednesday the 27th, from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. at the Missouri Cowan Library.
Okay, that sometimes people can't make that
That's
time,
right.
especially if they're working. And we have sitting around the table, and you weren't here at the beginning of the show, but maybe you were. We've got Project Xenia here. We've got Roncesvalles Refugee Relief, as well as Lifeline Syria here around the table in the studio. But so if there's anything you want to say to them, please do. But before you do, you're of course with Community Health Center. So talk about the healthcare needs of the refugees that are coming. 200 government-sponsored ones.
Well,
what do you expect?
Sure. So from our understanding, what we're going to be providing is, and through the leadership of Access Alliance, which is another community healthcare center, and St. Joseph's Hospital programming, and with Toronto Public Health and any other community healthcare providers, this is the excellent time that we coordinate and and work together we're going to be providing what we would call a more low threshold assessment center, so that we can triage people so they can get both immediate medical services like prescriptions and drugs that need filling that they haven't had or have been missing, and any type of vaccinations and any other type of assessments that we have to get them so they have easy, quick access to health care. There's that immediate piece, and then there's like within a 2-week period where they'll access primary health.
Now, you heard Naomi speaking perhaps about the problems that have been faced with, for example, some of the refugees who were government-sponsored end up in a hotel downtown, and, were, one of whom said that they wanted to go back. There were such problems. So you've seen that happen. What are the ways we can prevent that from happening again in Parkdale?
Well, within Parkdale, I think there might be a few unique pieces. One is that we're literally walking distance to the St. Joseph's Hospital and to other primary health in the immediate walking location. Parkdale Community Health Center has, in the past, had to work with newcomers and immigrant communities, and so
do we have translators, and do you have enough of
so
those?
We're in the midst of organizing that now. The translators, we're in the midst of organizing, like I said, on the ground, where we can have volunteers walk with people right literally across the street to the healthcare services. So we're in the midst of organizing that now, and so it's giving us a small little room there, a breathing space to be able to do this well and to hopefully learn from the lessons of the other hotels. I think the other piece for us is that it's a smaller number of people, of 200 people at one given time, and we have a huge network of not only primary health care providers and supporters, but we have a very large network of a wide range of people who, Parkdale is used to and has been historically and often a place where newcomers come, and where immigrant services get provided immediately. And we've had unique situations, particularly with our Roma community, and so we've learned lessons from that experience. So every experience that we have, we can learn from and hopefully put in place immediately or very close to immediate time periods to be able to respond rapidly. And that's what we're hoping to do in this case.
Yeah. Did anyone of you want to say something to Julie while we've got her on the line? Naomi.
One of the things that is being discussed now, which I think would be really useful to pursue, is that there are a number of approved sponsor groups like Jennifer's and Rain's, who are waiting for the refugee families that they have sponsored to arrive. They're organized, they're committed, they're interested. I think it would be really interesting if to this meeting that you are organizing or subsequent to the meeting that you're organizing, if you could somehow reach out to the sponsor groups to see if they would be prepared to volunteer with the government-assisted refugees at the hotel before the refugees that they have sponsored actually arrive, because some of them may not arrive for a number of months, and it might be a really good orientation in some ways for the sponsor groups to roll up their sleeves and get involved in a hands-on kind of way.
Does that make some sense, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for raising this. This is something that we were talking about and trying to tap into to these organizations and groups for sure. And so a number of people, mind you, we just found this out like last Friday that this is happening. So less than a week, we heard that we are going to be receiving 200 Syrian refugees that are government-sponsored. So having said that, a number of people have been networking, and this is exactly why we called this emergency meeting, not knowing if they were already going to be coming or not, but saying that we need to have this meeting. This is not just for service provider organizations or non-for-profits. This is about anyone who hears about this meeting in Parkdale to please come out, please bring your expertise, please bring us your experiences and your capacity and abilities to participate
beyond
in
Parkdale, because who knows who's listening. There may be some others. Rain or Jennifer, did you have anything that you wanted to ask Julia since we've got her on the line from Parkdale Community Health?
I guess in what particular areas our group could be helpful. I think Naomi's raised a really important point, that we're sort of sitting with bated breath. And, as we said before, the money's sort of the easy part. But sure, we'd love to jump in with both feet, I'm sure. So it'd be interesting to know in what specific ways we might be able to be of help.
Sure. So what we thought we would do on Wednesday at our this emergency meeting was identify what we do know, what we don't know, and what we're possibly anticipating. We're also asking our 3 levels of government representatives, Syrai being one of them, to talk to us about what they have been able to do or what they're doing in sense of community and networking and whatever resources can be provided. So that's one area. What we're hoping to do is actually do a go-around in the room where we're actually going to have headings of different topics where people can help, people can support, what resources they can provide, whether it's translation, whether it's being able to accompany people to appointments, immediate appointments. We've already spoke with, the Roncesvalles United Church, Emmanuel Howard.
It's called Roncesvalles United Church now.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. And they said they would be more than willing to be able to receive clothing and be able to use their thrift shop as a point of a departure for people when they're leaving and moving into their new homes. So we're going to need people who can coordinate that because we can't do that for sure. We need people who would be able to come possibly, and we don't know yet for certain is what we can do at the Howard Johnson's or what we can do in other facilities or locations in the community close by in terms of having World Cafes on Friday nights and entertainment and children's activities and parks and recreation type of services. So these are the type of things that we absolutely have to work together. Those people who have that experience or have that time that they can actually spend with people either at the hotel where they're staying or we create, ways in which we bring people to new locations in Parkdale while they're staying at the hotel. So we need to be creative and we need to think outside of the box, but we also need to think about what, and hear what are the possibilities. So we're hoping that we are going to get all the names and contacts of people. We're going to put that on a database. We're also hoping to identify key things that we're already thinking of and others might be thinking of, but we haven't thought about that together in terms of how something can actually be organized and then
Rain, you wanted to say something to Julia.
Yeah,
as well.
I know everything for kids in the area. I can definitely be a help there.
Great.
But my question has to do with housing. So is there a settlement agency that's helping these 200 people find permanent housing, and are you trying to have them settle in the Parkdale area?
So I have a few answers to that. One is that, as people may or may not know, COSPI is the lead settlement organization funded by the federal government to support this effort. We've already been in contact with a few of the settlement organizations. So, for instance, Polycultural Settlement Services are right across the street from Howard Johnson's. They literally just hired 2 Arabic-speaking settlement workers, and they will be able to work on that. They even mentioned some of the housing that's available, but in Mississauga. So some people may stay in Parkdale, absolutely. That might be a place where they settle. But others who will be coming out of the 200 people, may be going to various different locations across the GTA. We don't know that yet.
I might weigh in here too, and that is that a number of our larger property managers in the Parkdale area are willing to rent to refugees, but we were speaking on the basis of a sponsorship situation where the rent would be guaranteed by someone for a year. I mean, that's already a stretch, but any last thoughts to Julia? Because Julia, we're going to have to sign off with you in a minute, but certainly repeat again, 3:30 to 5:30, Wednesday 27th at Parkdale Community Health Center, which is...
No, it's at the library.
It's at the library,
yeah,
sorry. The Parkdale Library, which is on Queen Street, on the south side, just west of Dufferin. You can find it pretty readily if you're interested in being a help. Or if you're interested in information. Yes, thank you very much for calling in, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Naomi, you wanted to say something there.
No, I just wanted to say that the government does guarantee the housing as well for the full 12-month period. So it's not as if sponsors are guaranteeing more than the government is for landlords to consider.
For privately sponsored refugees?
Government-assisted refugees are supported for a year,
yes,
including the accommodation costs
but
by the government.
But privately sponsored refugees.
Privately sponsored refugees are the responsibility of the private sponsors.
So
for
that's
a year.
what I was talking to the property managers about at that point, because that was before I knew we had 200 coming, which obviously is news to all of us, which is exciting, very exciting. We have a few minutes left, and I just want to get some last thoughts. You just heard this, so this is pretty exciting news if they're all going to arrive. We don't know when, but it sounds pretty imminent. Does this change things for you, Jennifer?
Hearing what you just said? Well, we have a meeting tonight, which is fantastic. So we'll get caught up. We have a quote unquote gala next week, which on February 4th, which will sort of, we hope, top up our fundraising. But I think it's essential to sort of dig down and start talking about this. The piece that we were talking about, housing, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we anticipate. It's fantastic that you're doing that outreach, Sherry. But the notion of the long-term sustainability of this and the numbers that get floated around. I mean, when you really start to look at the Toronto situation, supporting it in the long term is just much more financially onerous. And I would say that's one of our largest concerns right now. So it'll be interesting to talk to this group, which she mentioned right across from Howard Johnson's. Wasn't familiar with that group. It would be fantastic to find out what they know and shortcuts they might have in order to assist us in that search.
So much of this is about developing connections. By the way, if you've just tuned in, you've missed an amazing show. But for sure, you can hear it on podcast. And we're talking all about Syrian refugees, what you need to know if you want to sponsor, what you need to know generally, and how to get involved in really being a true Canadian, and that is a welcoming person. Rain, what do you think after this discussion, after hearing what Julie had to say?
I think it's wonderful, and I think the suggestion of having us volunteer and get to know some of the arrivals some of the people that are coming soon is a great idea. Coming back to housing as well, we hoped for our family to settle in the Parkdale area so that they are near us. And it's not just about finding a permanent place where they can live for that year where we're going to guarantee the rent, but it's also about finding a place where they can live permanently and continue to afford it. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the challenge as well.
Yeah. We can talk after, but I do have the names of property managers who are willing to rent if they've got a space based on sponsorship for a year, which is not all property managers. So I was pleased to hear that. Naomi, 200 people going to arrive soon. What are your thoughts?
I doubt that the 200 people
will all arrive at once.
Will all arrive at once. But I think the more planning that can be done in advance, obviously, the better. I think I did spend a day at one of the hotels just last week where government-assisted refugees are being housed, not in the Parkdale area, in another area of the city. And it is really important to think about how do you occupy the children for the full day of, the time that they're there? How do you get a good head start and a good welcome to people as soon as they arrive? I know that the settlement agencies are working hard to try to get ESL classes starting in the hotels and getting some recreation programming going for the kids. I think that we have to acknowledge that particularly the government-assisted refugees that are coming in, many of them have been through very, very, very difficult situations, and some of them.
So, what would be a typical case then, if we can talk about anything that's typical in this situation? For example. Okay,
the people that are coming as government-assisted refugees are primarily coming from Lebanon or Jordan or Turkey. Some of the privately sponsored refugees are coming further afield than that, but the government-assisted ones are primarily coming from those countries. There are refugee camps in Jordan, but not all the refugees coming from Jordan have been in refugee camps. There are no refugee camps in Lebanon. Many of them have been living in fields, in farms, in slum areas, in the urban centers. The children are not allowed to go to school. The people are not allowed to, the adults are not allowed to work legally. They have not had access to services. Some of them have not had access to food for a while because the World Food Program is running out of food. So they're
So we're talking traumatized
we're
individuals.
talking
yeah.
about traumatized people. We're also talking, by and large, of larger families than is the norm in Canada, which makes finding affordable accommodation even more difficult. If you're talking about, 8 children and a single parent, or 8 children and 2 parents, that's hard to accommodate. We also, the government-assisted refugees are coming. The amount of money they get from the government in the first year is basically equivalent to what people would get on social assistance, which is not a lot of money, and we know how hard it is for people on social assistance to find appropriate housing. The good news is that the larger families do get some additional support with the child tax benefit credit and the universal child care. And if you have a large family, that is more money coming in that they will continue to get beyond the first year. So you have to think about that as part of their budget, and that allows the money to go a little bit further. But housing, it's an issue in Toronto for sure. It's not an issue in some of the other parts of the country. In Toronto,
this may be a way station in a sense for some of these families who will go on from the Howard Johnsons, for example, in Parkdale.
Well, they
Yeah.
might certainly go
Yeah.
further afield than downtown Toronto.
So we just have a few minutes. I just want you to give out the information about your group, how people can get in touch with you if they want to get more active and more involved, because that's where to start. And I know there's such an outpouring. One of the wonderful things that's come out of all of this is to see the generosity and the compassion of our own neighbors, because there's no doubt that that's the case. Naomi, Lifeline Syria, how do people get in touch with you?
Just go to our website. That's the easiest. There's a wealth of information on the website, and there's information about our training sessions that are coming up. We're doing them all the time. So just go www.lifelinesyria.ca.
Okay, and Rain.
If you want to learn more about our group, you can check out our website. We're at www.projectxenia.com.
Okay, and again, that's a